Hey there, Parker X listeners. This is Brett Wood coming at you with another blast from the past episode recorded in March of 2020 with Jim Corbett, Director of Studies at Walker Consultants out of Tampa, Florida. In this conversation, Jim and I talk about his history in the parking industry, moving from the private sector to the public sector and now the consulting side of our industry, how that varied background has helped him adapt into the consulting side, and the importance of good planning in a rapidly changing transportation ecosystem. Hope you enjoy. Hey there, this is Brett Wood with Parker X, and today we're sitting with Jim Corbett, the Director of Studies for Walker Parking out of Tampa, Florida. Hey, Jim.
Hey, Brett. How you doing?
I am doing well. Thanks for joining us here today on a lovely day in Sandestin, Florida. We're at the Mid-South Parking Conference, and thought we'd catch up with Jim about his history in parking and how he's kind of changing the role of the consultant with operational backgrounds and things like that. So, Jim, we love to start off with kind of how you got into parking and what's your history, along the way.
Sure. Fantastic. So, yeah, I kind of, like some of us, I fell into the parking space. I graduated with an undergrad degree in business psychology and didn't really want to pursue the psychology field necessarily, and ended up getting into an industrial sales role. Just a strange twist of events there, and was fairly successful in that space, and thought, there's got to be more to this, and stumbled into an opportunity to work for a couple of hotel chains in downtown Cincinnati, valet parking cars on Friday, Saturday nights, and Sunday mornings. And it was kind of neat, as a young 20-year-old, you had a lot of tips and cash in your hand, and you got to drive some nice cars in the process there, and kind of move with the who's who of the shakers of downtown Cincinnati at that time.
Did you work with Adam Jones doing that?
Well, Adam kind of came into the picture a little later after that.
Yeah.
So my first probably, let's call it first maybe year and a half, I was literally just a valet driver with a college degree on the weekends, and kind of a nice way to supplement that income. And so as time went on, the firm I was working for was Central Parking, as they had the operating contract for these hotels, the Hyatt and the Omni. And as time went on, they said, "Hey, Jim, we know you got a college degree, and you seem to work well with people, and you kind of like what you're doing here. Would you consider a management opportunity? Manage these guys that you're working with?" And I thought, well, let's talk salary, let's talk hours, let's talk what this could be, and lo and behold, next thing I knew, here I was, this guy running 4 or 5 different valets in downtown Cincinnati.
Off to the races at that point.
Go. Yeah, working just around the clock as most valet operators and managers do, and that kind of grew into at the time. This is kind of where Adam Jones came into the picture here. Central was growing pretty rapidly in the Cincinnati market there, and we ended up getting the stadium contract, and we're special event parking cars for baseball games, football games, things like that, and had quite a bit of the Class A office tower opportunities already. And so Adam and I just, we were kind of the 2 lead guys for Central in Cincinnati at that time, and have some really good stories, which would probably be a completely separate podcast here.
Parking after dark, yeah.
Right. So a lot of fond memories there. And so with Central, the way things worked is you did really good in one market, and that qualified you to move to a lesser attractive market that needed help. And so that led me to go from Cincinnati to Minneapolis and St. Paul. Central was having a hard time with some turnover there and some client dissatisfaction, and went to Minneapolis and did that for probably about a year and a half, and had some pretty good success there. We put together a good team, and then Shortly thereafter, Central purchased Allright. That was the big Central Allright merger. That was probably in the late 90s, 98, I want to say, 99, somewhere in that realm there. And Allright actually had a really good presence in the Minneapolis-St. Paul market, and as what Central was doing with Allright was determining who the more qualified, capable leaders in those specific cities would be to be the city manager or run the actual operations there. And of course, I was the new kid on the block. I'd only been in Minneapolis for less than a year and a half, and it didn't quite work to my favor there. But at the time, I was just going through Central's advanced training program there, and had an opportunity to meet Joe Molish, who was running the quality improvement team for Central out of the Nashville office. And so I transitioned to be on that team for a while, and that was kind of a pretty good opportunity where we got to travel to different markets and see how Central operated in different parts of the country and kind of get a big picture of what the firm was all about. And so it was also a great learning opportunity for myself, too, which kind of opened up some additional doors at that time. So as all good things kind of change and come to an end in that sense, they had some turnover after the Allright merger, and some of the lead Allright guys in some of these markets, year and a half later, were just saying, hey, this isn't for me anymore. And so they disbanded the quality assurance team at that point and shipped me to Cleveland, Ohio.
Oh, yeah.
So I was in Cleveland for probably about a year and a half, and I think it was just myself and an office manager, and I had an elderly gentleman that kind of did a lot of the maintenance work. So I had probably maybe another half a dozen cashiers, but it was me doing the business development during the day, operations at night, running special events on the weekends. So once again, it became kind of a 7-day-a-week operation there.
Yeah.
But, and in Cleveland, great city, but, I just didn't really see the future there for me necessarily in Cleveland. So at the time, Republic Parking was looking for an operations or a general manager to run their Ann Arbor contract. And so I made the transition from Central to Republic and ran the Ann Arbor contract for about 4 years there. And that was a pretty good opportunity working with the Ann Arbor Downtown Development Authority, very, very progressive organization, very efficient in their operations and planning strategies. So once again, now it's a different exposure coming around, learning more about how the big picture works. And fortunately, that was probably my first taste of municipal operations, municipal government, politics, things of that nature.
Right.
And so I thought, this is kind of cool, But at the end of the day, Republic was just the kind of the personnel manager, if you will. We had about 100 employees in that operation there, and we were managing operations 7 days a week. And we had a seat at the table with the Downtown Development Authority, and we're very involved in the budget process and things like that. But at the end of the day, we're still not quite satisfying the taste buds, as they say. And so I had this opportunity, responded to an opportunity to interview with the city of Tampa, Florida. And as with all municipal interview process goes, it's, you have that initial phone interview, and then they want to bring you down, and then you don't hear from them for, 2 or 3 months, and you think, geez, what did I say wrong? Was it a disaster? And so they eventually called back, and they said, hey, we'd like you to come down one more time and meet with the administrator at the time. And so I did that, and lo and behold, they made a job offer at that time. And long story short, I ended up my wife and I moved to Tampa, Florida at that time.
Yeah.
So this was about 2005. So really, my first, let's call it 10 years in the industry were with the private operator side of things.
And working on the private sector side of things, too, like hotels and valet and things like that.
Correct.
Yeah.
Absolutely, yeah. And, of course, it was the 90s and early 2000s, so it was a different time compared to today, of course. So got into the government side of things, and what was interesting about the economy at that time, of course, it was on the rise, 2005, and then all of a sudden 2008, 2009 came, and the bottom fell out of everything.
That's right, yeah.
So I got to see how the city reacted to that, financially, how they had to weather that storm, and everything literally, as most people remember at that time, was kind of put on hold. There were a lot of repurposing and cuts and things of that nature, and we had to do some of that, so that probably took us through to about 2000, maybe 11, 2012, I guess, and that's when things started to look a little more optimistic there. And so my final 3 years with the city we were able to do a lot more change. One of the things that we were able to do there was to completely revamp their on-street system. We standardized their equipment in all of the parking garages. It was very interesting when I first got there. It was kind of a lot of the shoebox cash-only type operations there. And this is 2005 in Tampa. You know, I mean, it was very interesting times there. And you know, I remember watching one of the cashiers work on my first week or two on the job there, and they had this kind of foot pedal in the booth, and when things got bad, they just pushed the foot pedal and the gate went up, and they got cars out of the garage. So again, if your goal is to minimize complaints, that was one way
Mission
to do
accomplished.
it. Yeah, you know, and just
the goal is revenue, though. Like, we are failing considerably.
Right. Yeah. You wonder what our challenges were, but you know, so there were some interesting things in that category, and you know, downtown Tampa is finally just now kind of coming to fruition with, obviously, Jeff Vinnick, the owner of the Tampa Bay Lightning there, has reinvested a lot into that downtown market, and so the landscape has changed considerably and will, you know, in the next 5 to 10 years be a different downtown. But much of when I got there in 2005 was just a lot of open lots, and this is the core of downtown.
Yeah.
You know, one of those towns where 5 o'clock rolls around on a Friday and
completely
gone.
empties out. Yeah.
Yeah. So. So that we had a new administration change come in, and there were some changes at that time, and that's when I parted ways with the city in 2015. And was interesting because my wife and I had become so attached to the Florida market. We were thinking, okay, what are we going to do now? You know, of course, completely unexpected when this happened, and. So we were talking to a lot of different folks. I think at that time I may have had a conversation with Gimli Horn as well to explore that an opportunity there. And I think the good thing about, you know, being in this industry is it was really awesome to have just a number of people that you could just pick up the phone and have a conversation with, you know, and kind of explore what's going on in their space and if there was an opportunity there. And, you know, I'm certainly very appreciative of that, and I think most of us are as well. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's a small little networked industry that we all look out for each other. So,
Right. So there was probably about a window of about maybe 4 or 5 months there where I was, you know, taking some time and trying to figure out what that next strategic move would be. And you know, as you've seen my track record, it's kind of been you know, it's gone from a very simple approach to this industry to something that's a little more involved at each step along the way. And so eventually Walker and I came to some pretty lengthy discussions, and they made an offer to me. And this was May of 15, I guess, about midway through 2015. And so it's been ever since then. It's coming up on a 5-year anniversary for me already.
5 years already.
5
wow.
years. It'll be in May. Yeah.
Time is flying.
Yeah. So it's been, you know, as we talked a little earlier about the economy has been great right now, and a great time to be a consultant because, you know, everybody needs a consultant these days, you know, and so that's been great. So yeah.
Well, and that's a really, really interesting history, you know, and lots of stops along the way, and basically almost touching every facet of our industry. If you get done with consulting, I think you probably need to go work for an airport, and you're done. You've got everything done.
Covered it all.
Yeah, no, it's so, and it's fascinating. So, you know, I'm a consultant, but I started right out of school. Got an engineering degree and started right out of school, and I think a lot of people in our industry are that way. They initially went into consulting versus you know, some other role, and obviously, like you said, none of us chose to be in parking. It chose us.
Right.
But I find it interesting because we find ourselves as consultants doing a lot of things that touch on operations. And the very wise Brandy Stanley one time told me that I didn't know crap about parking because I had never operated parking.
Sure.
I had never written a parking ticket and all those types of things. And I went and interned with Brandy for a week and did all those things.
I remember that.
Yeah. And so, I mean, it opened my eyes just to do it for a week and see kind of what the front line of parking looks like. But you, obviously, with the 15 years of doing the private sector and doing time with the city of Tampa and all those types of things, like, you bring a really strong background in the operations.
Right.
How has that transition from the operation side of things to the consultant side of things? What have been some of the successes with that, and what have been some of the challenges with it?
Sure. Well, I kind of always knew that consulting was going to be the kind of the end game, let's call it, after spending so many years on the operation side, because, you know, you're working in these different markets, you're seeing different things, you're working with different personalities, different politics, and so it's a story, you know, and so probably the best thing about it is I've shared, you know, with the city of Tampa, eventually they got tired of listening to me. It was bringing a lot of ideas that were great ideas, but just politically they couldn't make the change and make the implementation. So the good part of that is now working for people that want to hear what I have to say in that sense, and want to know what their options are. And so you talk a little bit about that transition of operations was really doing in the sense and being out there on the streets and in the parking structures and probably the most challenging thing as it is with anybody that probably comes from operation is you've spoken, you've presented a lot of this information, but actually converting it into more of kind of a written deliverable or a putting together more advanced PowerPoint presentations in front of groups like that. Because when I presented in front of City Hall or Tampa City Commissioners, it was usually just one slide up there, and we talked about that slide for a half hour or so, and parking was always kind of last on the agenda as well too, so I didn't have a lot of face time there, but I think that's been it, and you certainly, as a consultant, you would probably agree with this. Your organization skills have to be top notch.
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, there's deadlines here. There's need this tomorrow. This has changed. Now I got to have this by Friday, and so
all while moving at 1,000,000 miles an hour.
That's correct.
Exactly.
Correct.
Yeah.
And thinking about what that next opportunity is going to be too. So it was really moving from a much slower pace on the government side to, oh my goodness, how do I going to make this work? And what's nice about Walker and other firms, I'm sure, is you've got resources that can help you, but you really have to be just a good time management person, and things will work itself out essentially. So, but yeah, I think that's probably been the biggest challenge there is just learning that, and like I said, coming into the industry at the height of the economy here is just the phone just doesn't stop ringing.
It's a great time. There's a lot going on for all of us right now. So, as a consultant at Walker for 5 years now, tell me about the type of work you're doing there.
Sure. Well, the initial thought was that because of my municipal background, I would be working with a lot more municipalities, and as we know, those opportunities don't always come up as frequent as you'd like them to, and when they do come up, they're usually not conveniently in your backyard.
Right.
So it's in the Walker framework, we've got a pretty good qualified group of people that do what I do. That it's easier for them to take on a lot of that municipal work in the other markets. So there's really, being in the Southeast and the Atlanta and Florida market, there's been a ton of opportunity to work with developers. I find myself really, being more of someone that should be pursuing a certified planning degree at this stage, because it's all about developers come with their mixed-use projects. They need to work with zoning boards to get their projects approved. I think I've learned you're a big component of the shared parking process.
Yep.
I am as well, and I think that's the key to the future in a lot of these developments. And so it's been representing developers in front of zoning boards to get their project approved using that shared parking approach. And as we know, Florida has a lot of very archaic codes. and
vary from city to city,
yes.
right? Yeah.
Oh, yeah. And so many of these folks are open to it, and they have a clause that mentions shared parking in their code, but none of them don't really understand what that translates to. And so it's been fun, working with the municipalities and making friends on both sides, not just the developer, but learning about how the different municipalities work with their zoning and planning boards. So, interestingly enough, that's what I'm doing a lot of these days, really. But it's, like I said, I think the real joy is working on some of the larger projects, more the strategic planning.
Yeah.
A lot of as your experience as well, some of these smaller communities, second-tier cities, third-tier cities that, they see what the bigger cities are doing, and they say, well, we want to do that. Can you help us? And the good part about that is I can help you, but I can tell you what the lessons learned should be, where the failures were. And
that's right.
And just because it worked in Fort Lauderdale doesn't mean it's going to work in Stewart.
That's right. So, absolutely. Yeah. And it's an interesting time because everybody's realizing the importance of good coordinated parking management for growth, for economic development, all those types of things. And so helping people make good decisions about it. To go back to your shared parking thing, it's interesting when I find myself working in the world of shared parking in the development community or working with town planners, I feel like I'm doing a lot of educating on both sides, right? Like, because one side, typically the city, always wants to try to create with as little parking impact as possible. Let's not overbuild it. Let's not do too much.
Right.
And the other side, likely the developer, or probably more so their financiers, want to build as much parking as possible. And so it's trying to bring those groups to the table. Do you find that the narrative is starting to change in the world that you're working in, where people are starting to understand the value of shared parking and doing it right-sized?
I think so. It's like the experience has been positive overall, I would say. But the unfortunate take on it is, places like Florida and some of these bigger southern states are still very car-centric. And, a lot of shared parking works on some principles of, mode of transit, of course, and where you just don't have that mode of transit, it's very difficult to convince somebody that if you put a fine dining restaurant in here, it's going to be popular on Thursday, Friday, and Saturday nights, and that's the intent by the developer. But it's very difficult to get the city off that. We don't have to overbuild this just for the restaurant component. It's there are some other uses that could share in here.
Well, that's right. And sometimes you've got that multimodal component, and you still have to convince people that it's going to work with the multimodal component, because there's not a belief that people that are going to go to that restaurant or whatever it may be
Right.
are going to use that multimodal component. But the story I always tell is, like, if the restaurant's good, people are going to find a way to get there.
Right.
Nobody's not going to go because of parking. They'll find a way to park. We can valet park them. We can do whatever. But if it's good, it will survive.
Absolutely.
So,
Yeah.
well, it's interesting. I think you and I are working in the same place right now. We're wrapping up some work in the same place. We've been working with Corey out
Right.
in Oklahoma City, and you guys were working with him as well, doing some operational assessments and things like that. How often are you doing that type of work, where you're doing kind of the auditing and things like that?
It does have its opportunities. I'd probably say maybe it's once or twice a year, to be honest with you. It's one of those things that, and until an organization has found a flaw, let's call it, people just don't necessarily want to spend money on something like that.
Which is unfortunate, because you can almost find the flaw before the flaw happens,
Right.
if you do it the right way.
Right, and many times, the work that we would uncover will pay for the act to do the study. The savings and the efficiency created by that. So it's, even the best of the operators, all of our CAP associates, that are running big organizations, I think they kind of know that something like that needs to be done at some point in time, but it's just convincing the administration to spend money on that. And as you're probably aware, these things can be pretty intense, in the sense that it's not just a simple $20,000 opportunity, because there's so many layers to uncover and so many pieces that need to be checked and double checked in the process there. I'm an APO accredited parking organization site reviewer as well,
nice.
and so
Yeah.
it's very parallel to that type of work. You're looking to make sure that everybody's following best practices and their finance pieces in place, and they actually, as you probably find out too, that many of these organizations really don't have updated standard operating procedures out there, and
No.
that's kind of where it all starts from.
I find that it's like it lives in the brain of, like, the enforcement supervisor or the off-street supervisor or somebody that's out there in the field doing it, and
Right.
you're like, please write that down, because
Yeah.
if you leave,
Sure.
we lose everything.
Exactly.
Yeah. So you're right.
Yeah.
It's interesting, because I've had the opportunity over the last few years to start doing more of that type of work with auditing, and I would think with your operational background, like, that really gives you a leg up,
Right.
because you've been on both sides of it now, and you can see kind of the nuance of where things should be working a little more smoothly or something like that.
Right. Yeah. It's just I think, like I said, it's just organizations. There's many other things they can spend money on,
Yeah.
and convincing them that it's a gut check. You should do it. I'm not saying you need to do it every year, but every couple of years you
Yeah.
probably need to do an assessment there. And so Corey's been great, and Corey, he understands it. He's a very strong operator, very good operator.
good, yeah.
Understands nuts and bolts.
Don't tell him we said that, but he's
that's
good.
right.
Yeah.
But so it's good, and obviously we like to use reference type work to pursue other opportunities, and I think Corey's going to be a good reference for us once we wrap this up.
Yeah.
And in his case, it was we go there 1 year, do the baseline assessment, give him and his group the opportunity to make changes and to address some of the things we made, and then we go back 2 years later and do kind of the follow-up audit there, which is good. And that's a great piece that anybody can share with their administration, their board, their council, their commission, because at the end of the day, that's what everybody wants is, are we operating as we should be operating?
Well, I mean, it kind of goes back to the concept of, like, an annual report, right? Like, we tell universities a lot of times that they need to be doing annual reports to just convey to to their population, the how and why of what they're doing. But for that purpose, I mean, even with Corey, if everything's going right and you don't uncover anything that's dramatically wrong,
Right.
it's good to walk into council and to to the COTPA board and say, look, we're doing things right.
Right.
Because anytime you can justify the success, it breeds more success and more opportunity for success.
Right.
Yeah. Well, let me ask you this. So, I mean, you've been all over the place. What is exciting you about kind of the growth of our industry right now?
Well, that's a really open question there.
Yeah.
I like that. And it's kind of hard to really kind of to put that into kind of a soundbite, if you will. But I like the idea that organizations are continuing to look at how they can operate more efficiently at these times, and I think. Along those lines of kind of this mobility change here. I mean, obviously, that mobility is really the big word these days,
Yeah.
and it's not all about necessarily the single occupant driver showing up for work or an event or anything like that. There's other ways, and so I, like probably yourself and others, are kind of trying to get our hands around. We know this change is going to come. We know that eventually the single occupant driver will. I don't want to say it will ever go away, but I think it will be greatly impacted and greatly changed. So when's that going to happen?
Right.
That's the big question. Is it 2022? Is it 2030? When is it going to happen? And I think a lot of that is relevant to kind of the urban area and how the urban area changes. And of course that requires a lot of density. The more density, the bigger opportunity there is. But then you got to factor in the whole workforce. How are people working more remote these days, which certainly seems like a trend. I was recently doing some work up in the Old Fourth Ward in Atlanta, and we were actually looking at a residential site, probably about a 240 unit site, just kind of understanding the behaviors of folks that were in this market. And we found that probably 80% of the people that lived in this unit were self-employed, or their vehicle never left the home.
Wow.
And so there was enough there. It was not too far from the Ponce City Market there, so you had your retail, your food, and things like that. But it's close enough to downtown that it's easy to commute right into downtown through a ride share or something like
Right.
that. Yeah. But so it's really interesting to see more of that. Not so much the commuting for the traditional workspace, when you can certainly do that from a tablet or any kind of mobile device remotely, and that excites me. I would prefer to work more remotely than have to go in and sit at a structured desk and have
Understood.
the old desk phone there on the corner of the desk.
Understood.
Yeah.
I do enjoy. I work remotely and have for years, and it's wonderful. To the point about the mobility, like, it's fascinating to me because we keep expecting people to abandon their cars, and to this point, people haven't gone all in.
Right.
But they are truly. Atlanta's a great example. They're truly taking advantage of all of the modes that are available to them. With whether in that market it's MARTA or the streetcar, rideshare, scooters,
Right.
whatever it may be. And you're seeing people kind of make commute choice based on their needs for that day,
Right.
which is fascinating because as we do more of that, that's where we're going to start seeing the script flip a little bit.
Sure.
and start moving towards a much more reduced single occupant vehicle world, which is what as transportation planner, that's my master's degree background. That's the world I've been working in since I graduated from the master's program, is how do we reduce SOV.
Yeah.
And it's exciting to see all of that begin to come to fruition.
Mm-hmm.
Now, you and John did an interesting presentation yesterday about autonomous vehicles, and they did it in a Family Feud format, which was a lot of fun. I
Right.
lost, which is unfortunate, but so it was really, really interesting. And we talk about AVs on this podcast, and we talk about AVs in the context of these conferences, and we really just don't know yet
Right.
what is coming. But there was some really good and structured research, y'all did in that about who's driving the market change and things like that.
Sure.
How did that research come about? What kind of things went into that?
Well, again, when you're trying to put something together and you're looking for meaningful content, and the other part is, as you said, the Family Feud concept is we didn't want to make it overly technical, and there was a fine line there, is because most folks, as we find, just they hear about this concept, but they have no idea what it really means. Until you've attended an opportunity to read something or attend a presentation to kind of get a deeper understanding of what autonomous vehicles is all about, most people really don't know.
Yeah.
And so we wanted to make it interactive there and keep it as simple. And so as you begin to research a lot of this stuff, and people have already provided a lot of the research, of course, it's across the board. I mean, it's amazing how deep and how vast this is. And so, on that kind of that topic there, I have, my wife and I each have vehicles, and we're kind of we live in a remote suburban area, and ideally, I'd love to give up my car. But in doing so, that's giving up a lot of that independence.
That's right.
And I think we could do it, but ideally, it's you still. I think Monday through Friday is one type of lifestyle, and then of course that weekend opportunity. And I think most people, when they do weekend getaways, unless you're flying somewhere, you're driving somewhere.
That's right.
You do a lot of the one trip, one tank trips to various places for your social activity, and so it's interesting to see how that will change. And I of course I think it's all about density. If you got that infill, which of course is really happening like madness in the Florida market there, I think that's going to help that opportunity. But full autonomous vehicles, I don't know. I see it probably happening more so in kind of campus environments where the footprint is controlled, and you're not having kind of mainstream interface with that autonomous activity there. You see a lot of shuttle buses
Shuttling,
on campuses and things like that. But I just don't know. I'm excited about vehicle-to-vehicle communication and vehicle-to-infrastructure communication. I think that's all just fascinating stuff. But it's like when my tablet crashes or I got to reboot my cell phone, it's like, oh geez,
right?
that happens a lot,
Yeah.
And so
it is there's a lot of nuance to kind of to get to the full adoption of personal SOV or even rideshare SOV, and like you said, the shuttling on campuses. Or I was talking with one of the officials from Panama City Beach yesterday, and he was talking about how they're going to do a shuttle along the main drag from beach lot to beach lot, and that could be autonomous, just one way in each direction. But cars, everybody driving their own car autonomously, there's a lot to work out to get there, and the technology is the least of it. That can be done rather rapidly, but the insurance, the ethics. I mean, that was one of the questions you had yesterday. Was what are the hurdles? And there were some big hurdles to get there.
Sure.
Yeah. Well, this has been fascinating. I appreciate you taking some time with us today. If people want to get in touch with you or Walker Parking, how do they do that?
Sure. Well, the best way, we've recently kind of revamped our website, so probably the easiest way is to go on the website and go under the people page, and you can see my contact information there as well. But of course, email address is always a good one, Corbett at Walker Consultants. Pretty straightforward. And obviously I try to get around and do a lot of these conferences and meet people face to face. So please, by all means, if you see me, stop me. Let's have a cup of coffee.
Yeah, he's a very interesting man to talk to. So thank you, Jim. Good. And good news, you definitely did better than Adam Jones.
All right.
Mission accomplished.
Sorry, Adam.
Thanks, Jim.
Thanks, Brett.
Thank you for listening to the Parker X podcast. We sincerely appreciate it and hope you are enjoying our content. Please remember to rate, review, comment, subscribe, and share. And follow us on LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. The following has been a production of Parker X.